In the last vignette, we have been speaking about the mind of man, the natural mind, the natural emotions of man that tend always to bring man astray, and the necessity of subjecting our minds and our emotions to divine revelation. And we have defined revelation as the things that Christ had said and did, all of which are written down and collected by the fathers of the church. Now, the mind and the emotions must be subject to divine revelation, and when it is subject, the mind becomes more intelligent, and the expression of one's emotions become very noble. When divine revelation governs our mind and our emotions, and we begin to act in accordance to divine revelation, that is what you call faith. So faith is the obedience of our mind and emotions to the commands of Christ that is found in divine revelation. In the past, we have seen some of these commandments summarized, for instance, in the words to be humble and meek, when Christ says, "Learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart." And so when a Christian acts, and his action is an act wherewith his mind and emotions are subject to divine revelation, that is what you call an act of faith. If we therefore sit down and analyze our actions, all our actions, how many of them can fall under the category of acts of faith? And how many of them would fall under worldly influence? If you sit down, you will discover that you have many foolish thoughts. When you attend religious activities, you do it without any consciousness of your mind. And oftentimes you find yourself falling into temptation because you keep on making the lives of others in the world as the pattern of your action. So the act of faith in the Catholic Church is an act of obedience. It is an act by which we subject our minds and emotions to divine revelation. At the beginning, this act of obedience is quite difficult. Then it becomes easy if you continue to obey. Then it becomes unconsciously done. And eventually, it becomes natural. At the beginning, to make this act of obedience, this act of faith, is quite difficult. So you have to make many small acts of faith. But this is very good for beginners, especially those who had been great sinners. So these very small acts of faith help you to make a good beginning from a life of sinfulness. And so after making numerous small acts of faith, you graduate to the higher degree of faith, wherein everything you do is motivated by, oh, if I do this, shall I go to heaven? Oh, if I do this, shall I go to hell? But as you go on, all this, sordid way of thinking begin to disappear. And then you develop the nobler motivation for making your act of faith. That from now on, you are going to do good. And your concentration is on not so much on the good that you are doing, but on the fear that you might do something wrong. And so you notice the good now that you are doing is not foremost in your mind. It is the fear of displeasing God. And after that, you go to the higher and nobler degree of acts of faith wherein you start doing good and avoiding evil almost unconsciously. And when this person is asked, why are you doing good? And why are you avoiding evil? And his answer is always full of simplicity, because that is how God expects me to act. That is how Christ would want me to behave. That is the way of the Catholic Church. And so when a person begins to show his act of faith by an act of obedience, by subjecting his mind and his emotions to divine revelation, this is what we call the Catholic mind, or another word for it is the spiritual mind, because this person now is behaving in the spiritual or the supernatural level. And oftentimes, these persons, these people who are obedient, who have great faith, are not amazed at their behavior. They expect to behave that way because they are now guided by divine providence, while all the people around them are amazed and oftentimes confused by their manner of behavior. This is the Catholic mind. But the tragedy is that very few Catholics have this mind. King David has a description for this kind of mind, the spiritual mind. He calls it the princely heart of innocence. Now let us differentiate again the common man with one who have the Catholic mind. The common man looks at God from a distance. It is like a light at a distance, and usually when he goes towards this light, he has a difficult time adjusting his boat, oftentimes going astray, sometimes in the right direction, and again, out of focus. But with a man with faith, God is in front of him. He does not have to look for God outside him. In fact, God is inside him. The common Catholic and one who has the true Catholic mind are both really obedient, except the obedience of one who has true faith is in the form of a habit, something that he wears the whole day, governing his action every second and every minute. While the common, as we call them, or ordinary Catholic, have what we call random obedience. The obedience of one who has faith is permanent. The obedience of the common ordinary Catholic is custom-built, meaning to say he only obeys when he feels it or when he finds it very convenient. When a person with faith obeys, he obeys from his mind and his heart, as we have seen, while the common Catholic only obeys with his mouth. They say that when a child is still a child, if he's allowed to stay around his mother, he would learn the language of the mother without any formal instruction. It seems he would just absorb the language of the mother. Now, the same thing happens in the spiritual life. Most common Catholic, ordinary Catholic they call themselves, live in the world And so they do not realize it. They are absorbing all worldly habits without even realizing it. They do not have to be taught how to be worldly or how to be sinners. The world is so full with it, and so just living in the world makes them absorb all these defects. And so the same thing happens when a person or a child, like Saint Timothy, would live with a family or with persons who live by the rule of divine revelation. He doesn't have to be taught. He simply absorbs it and begins to live by faith. Many of the common or ordinary Catholics behave in this manner. Often, when they feel guilty and they realize so many sins that they have, they sit down and they try to find out the good that they have done in the past in order to assuage their consciences and give them sort of a good chance before the judgment seat of God. And so they begin to think in this manner and reason in this manner. They would say, well, I have done so many good things for the poor. I have never harmed or killed anyone. I have never committed adultery. I have taken good care of my family, children, my wife. I have never defrauded or deceived anyone. And I have a very good name in the world, respected name in the world. Well, anyone without divine revelation can also do that. You must go on to perfection. You must be much more than what you are right now. You must be a new creation, completely different from what you were before. God bless you.